All right, everybody, welcome back to the Here for the Truth podcast. My name is Joel Rafidi. I got my co-host Yerasimos with me as always. Today we are joined by guest Chris Horlacher. Some of you may be familiar with him through his close acquaintance with Jeff Berwick. In this conversation, we take a very deep dive into an alternative, or maybe alternative to the alternative look at the history of Atlantis, what Atlantis was, who the key figures were, the location, and its importance. And in the beginning, we have a potentially controversial, potentially triggering for some conversation about Freemasonry, Chris's connection with Freemasonry, and whether Freemasons warrant many of the labels and claims asserted against them, and even perhaps some of the misconceptions around some of the hand signs, signals, associations, rites of passage within, that club, etc. All in all, an incredibly fascinating conversation. There's no doubt about that. One definitely worthy of listening to for sure. Right before we bring Chris in, I just want to highlight that at this point, there's a little over a week to join the next round of Rise Above the Herd. Doors for this round do close on July 23. We're taking a maximum of 15 students. And as you've heard us mention many times, this is a holistic 10-week self-development program for truth seekers, crossing many terrains in order to really push you to your authentic path, to becoming who you were born to be, and to just creating the life which you genuinely feel as though you crave and you want to live. And that's what we're about. We're about enhancing your experience through developing a friendly relationship with truth. And that's what this podcast, this platform, and our programs have always been about. So if that piques your interest, you can head to Rise Above the Herd to learn more about it. The website's riseabovetheherd.co, or the link is in the show notes as well. And you can join the program there and come on a transformative journey with us.
You are now listening to the Here for the Truth podcast, hosted by Joel Rafidi and Yerasimos.
Today we have with us Chris Horlacher. His interest is in the occult and esoteric arts. Having begun his studies as a teenager, he later was informed by his family that he came from a centuries-old line of Freemasons that includes several Grand Masters. While rising in his career to the highest ranks in the world of finance and entrepreneurship, he continued his exploration of the ancient mysteries. In 2023, Chris published The Apocalypse of Yajnavalkya, a book that's catapulted the discussion about Atlantis, the Anunnaki, fallen angels, and Nephilim into an entirely new dimension. Chris is a past director of the Mises Institute of Canada and a speaker at many liberty and cryptocurrency events across America. As a curator of the Library of Kern, the resurrected repository of Atlantean wisdom, his mission is to bring hidden secrets of ancient humanity to light. Chris, welcome to Here for the Truth.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys.
It's great to have you here, man. One way I guess we always like to kick these discussions off for first-time guests is, what are some of the major catalyzing moments in your personal hero's journey that really shifted the trajectory of, I guess, your life and your career and your path?
I first started down, I guess, the occult or esoteric path as a teenager. I was fascinated with ancient Egypt and ancient cultures, and sort of the world religions. And I was reading a book called Holy Blood, Holy Grail when I was about 18 or 19. And this book was actually the inspiration for the Da Vinci Code. Mm-hmm. And it has a theory about the Holy Grail and how Jesus and Mary Magdalene had some kids, and there was this bloodline that the Gnostic Christians were protecting for 1,000 years, and this campaign by the Catholic Church to exterminate them, culminating in the siege of this fortress that was run by a Gnostic sect called the Cathars, took place, and they were wiped out, and that was the end of the Gnostics. So I found this all very fascinating. But when my mom saw me reading this book, she brought she mentioned to me that my grandfather was a very high-ranking Freemason, and if I'm interested in these things, I should talk to him. And that was the beginning of my eventual initiation into Masonry. And in about 18 months, I was a Master Mason. And that sort of, I guess, accelerated my esoteric education in a sense, because, of course, Masons, a lot of them are very interested in this stuff. And most Grand Lodges maintain libraries full of this kind of material. So it's readily accessible, and you can find some pretty interesting stuff. Most of it is there aren't any sort of hidden volumes of books or anything like that you can't find anywhere else. This is all stuff that you can buy today on Amazon, but it was nice just to have it all there in one place. And from there, though, I kind of reached the end of, I thought, where Masonry would take me, because one of the interesting things about becoming a Master Mason is you're told at that point, yeah, we've inherited these rituals and this body of knowledge, but we don't really understand it. We know there's stuff missing, and we think this stuff goes all the way back to Atlantis. So now you, Mr. Freshly Minted Master Mason, are charged with going out into the world and trying to unravel this. And so that became,
was that like your personal mission? Like, do other people in there, like, do they get like anointed? Now you shall go out in the world and do this.
Well, it's that everybody gets hit with that message, but because that's part of the Master Mason, I guess, at each degree you receive a lecture, and so that everybody gets the exact same lecture. But a lot of people don't pursue that. They pursue doing more degrees. So they'll join the Scottish Rite and go up to the 32 and maybe the 33rd degree, or they'll go into York Rite. And you can find these rituals all online now. There really are no secrets in Freemasonry as far as these rituals are concerned. And you can read through them. And for the most part, they're basically plays reenacting certain parts of the Bible. And so a lot of the hand signs that you see submasons do, or a lot of people talking about, are really actually they're a reference to a specific verse of the Bible. And so this is all in, you could go to
can you give us a common example of one of those?
Okay, so what you just did there, that actually is not a Masonic sign.
Okay, yeah, I feel like that's the one you see all the time online. Because that's
he's been watching too many Jay-Z video clips. So.
I know.
Yeah,
but a very famous one, the hand.
Hand on the thing
stuck in your into your jacket.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
That is a Masonic sign, but it doesn't indicate anything nefarious. It's actually a reference to a verse in the Bible, as they all are. And so there's this one part in the Bible where I forget who it was. I think it might be Noah, but he's talking to God, and God says, stick your hand in your shirt like this. And he does, and then he pulls it out, and his hand is all shriveled up as if he were dead. And then God is like, now put it back. And then his hand comes back out fine. And there's this whole big message about that. But it's really just, these signs are just ways of signaling or making a reference to a particular part of the Bible. There's a lot of stuff in the Bible, and it's called the volume of the sacred law, and they say everything that you need to know is in here. You can read other things, but the Bible,
Exodus,
the Bible is
Exodus 4:6-7. Then the Lord said, "Put your hand inside your cloak." So Moses put his hand into his cloak, and when he took it out, the skin was leprous. it had become as white as snow. Now put it back into your cloak, he said. So Moses put his hand back in his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. There you go.
Yep. There you go. That's it. And that's all that sign means. It's not a indication that you're part of a global conspiracy. Now, I need to say, though, that there are people who are using Masonic signs to troll people, and this has been going on for centuries. The most famous, I guess, satanic Mason, Luciferian Mason hoaxer was called Leo Taxil. He was a French guy, educated by the Jesuits, by the by. And so he constructed this vast body of literature about a sect of Freemasons called the Palladium Rite that engaged in all of these sex rituals and ritual sacrifice. Everything you see or you hear going on in elite circles. And he attributed this all to this one sect of Masons being led by a guy named Albert Pike. But in 1896, I think it was 1896, somewhere in the late 1890s, he holds a press conference because the global press is really pushing him hard for any sort of proof of it, these stories he's spinning in these books that he's publishing, which the Catholic Church is just eating up and pushing all over the world. And he holds this press conference. Hundreds of people are there, monks, bishops, Masons, political figures, other literary figures. And he just says, he comes right out and says, this was all a hoax. Gotcha. You have any idea how much money I've made off selling you this BS? And he maintained this story to the day he died. And there's shortly about 6 months after he died, a Catholic archbishop, or it's another high-ranking Catholic, he eulogizes him in this Catholic journal and calls him the world's worst liar, who defrauded all of Christendom with his bullshit, and he's burning in hell for making fun of us and taking advantage of our prejudices. So it was an interesting episode, but this all goes back to an encyclical called Humanum Genus, and this was published by Pope Leo the 13th, I think, again in the late 1890s. And this is where you begin to hear sort of the story of a Masonic global conspiracy to take down religion and all governments. And so he spends most of the letter just railing against Freemasons. They worship the devil and they're evil and blah blah blah. But when he finally gets into some specifics about what it is that Masons are doing, he zeroes in on the fact that they are pushing the separation of church and state. That was his only actual argument or complaint. He didn't like that they were saying that, state and church should be separate. And he thought that the Catholic Church should either be in charge or at least have significant influence over all of the governments in the world. And the Masons are going around saying, no, that's not a good idea. We look at the United States. They have a separation of church and state. There's an amendment forbidding the establishment of a national religion, and things are going really good. So it almost, to be anti-Masonic is almost to be anti-American in a sense, because that separation is enshrined in the First Amendment. It's a very important part of the U.S. Constitution. And it's helped greatly, I think, in maintaining, a peaceful society. Things are not so great now because various extremist ideologies have taken hold of very powerful groups, and that's never a good place to be if you're not sort of in with one of these extremist groups, because anybody who's not towing the line is viewed as an enemy. And that is, something that Masons are exceptionally aware of, is the fanatic. So the fanatic is a person that is, to be avoided, or, at least, not really engaged with too seriously, because they're not interested in wisdom or peace or learning. They're interested in power and forcing their view of the world on everybody else.
I feel like you see that in so many institutions. I mean, can you say the institution is evil, or are there evil elements or people that want to take advantage, of the knowledge they've gained, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions, like, oh, all Freemasons are these horrible human beings and they want to take over the world. And I just don't, I don't.
Well,
Yeah, it's not a Masonic conspiracy, but that is an easy sell to the public. The real problem, there is a global conspiracy. It's just a nameless, faceless organization, and that's the way they like it. Yeah. They've carried on this way for thousands upon thousands of years, and they've managed to take control of the world much earlier than I think anybody believes. And this is one of the big revelations in the Apocalypse of Yajnavalkya, because ultimately my journey through the esoteric led me to someone who had knowledge far, far beyond anything I had encountered before. And they had the research, and they had presented it to me and said, this is what I think is the truth of our history and what has happened here on this planet. But it brings so many unexplained things together in such a coherent way, with so much evidence, that it's impossible to ignore once you see it.
Yeah.
And so that is what became the Apocalypse of Yajnavalkya, because, as you mentioned, I'm in the finance and entrepreneurship space. So making companies, running companies, making existing companies run better. This is what I do. And so this is why they chose to partner with me, not only because of my knowledge in the esoteric space, that it wouldn't take a lot of catching up for me to do, because I already knew about Atlantis, I knew about the Book of Enoch, I knew about Hermeticism and Hermes Trismegistus. You do a lot of reading as a Mason, because there's a lot to read.
Yeah, of course there is. Yeah, just quickly on that, I want to mention like this would just blow and warp so many people's minds, just to try disconnect the idea that all Masons are part of some super, particularly like within the truth the world and truth the community. Like, it's just so deeply ingrained that if there's a Mason, or if someone has any kind of Masonic connection, then immediately this person gets cast into this box where, like, it needs to be handled very, very carefully.
Yeah. And that all goes back to Leo Taxil's hoax, because if you look at the evidence that they present, it all goes back to him. So anytime you see something referencing AC de la Rive is the source of a very famous, not real Albert Pike quote that you see tossed around a lot about Luciferianism, and Lucifer is God, and Adonai is also God, and he made it up. Well, actually, Leo Taxil took advantage of this guy, because he was a rather naive Catholic journalist who wanted to kind of ride on Taxil's coattails into stardom, and he published something called La Femme et l'Enfant dans la Franc-Maçonnerie, which is like the woman and child in Freemasonry. And that's where that quote is found. But you also see a lot of, anything talking about the Palladium Rite or the 90th degree. This is all stuff that got started by Leo Taxil. Even the Baphomet. So the Baphomet, the big goat-headed thing, is it was first drawn by a French guy named Eliphas Lévy in, I think, 1854. And he drew this as, like, he tells you exactly what it is and what every part of it represents in his book, which is Dogma and Ritual of High Magic. You can get an English translation of the entire thing if you want. That's available. You can find a copy of it on the online archive. But he explains exactly what this image is, and it's not a devil or anything. It's actually an alchemical drawing, because a lot of what's in that book has to do with alchemy, and it's a journey through alchemical symbolism. And so this is he's just throwing a new one into the realm of alchemical drawings. And so here it is. And it's a fusion of opposites, which is, alchemy. You take the sulfur and the mercury, and which are opposing forces in sort of the corpus of alchemical knowledge, and you fuse them together to make the Philosopher's Stone. And so in the Baphomet, you see man and beast, light and dark, good and evil, man and woman. Like every duality you can think of, he piled into this one drawing.
Yeah, just on that. I think Baph is Da, which is father, and Metis is Mart, which is mother. So Baph is baptism, Metis is wisdom. So Baphomet means to bathe in wisdom.
Bathe in wisdom, the word Baphomet I have heard, although I haven't seen a proof. Like I haven't seen the work actually done to do this. But if you take Baphomet and reverse it, that spells out Sophia in Greek.
Oh,
which is, of course, you guys know, is wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. Baphomet.
Yeah. Was it? So
nevertheless, Leo Taxil
by the Church of Satan.
What'd you say?
I think that symbol was adopted by the Church of Satan, right?
Yeah, but that happens often. You have these like benign or positive symbols
exactly
to get co-opted.
Yeah, well,
swastika.
Yeah, so the swastika has an incredibly interesting history. It's over 10,000 years old. The oldest swastika ever found was carved into an elephant some animal tusk. And I think it was found in Ukraine or Bulgaria or somewhere over there. And it's over 10,000 years old. And you find swastikas all over the planet.
Yeah.
Everywhere. Every culture that has ever existed has had a swastika or something that looks uncannily like a swastika. And so this is a big mystery. Where did this symbol come from, and how is it that so many societies have a version of it?
It's the Big Dipper, right?
That's one theory. I don't know if I necessarily believe it, because of course you have to draw in the parts linking the Dipper to the North Pole Star. It could be that. It could be something else entirely. I don't know, because in the Eastern renditions of it, they put dots in the 4 quadrants. So what is that all about? That doesn't align with what's in the sky. There's not a big star in between the cup of the Dipper and the North Star. So I have reservations about that interpretation.
Okay.
It could be a drawing of a vortex or something.
I just think it's incredible that one of the oldest symbols known to man is the symbol that if someone saw it, like, you would be, I mean, it's the end of the world if you wrote it down anywhere. If you'd be canceled, you'd probably be thrown in prison if you put it on somewhere. Like, it's
that almost makes me believe it is something good, because we live in upside down world. We live in an upside down world.
100%.
Good is bad, right is left. Politicians really are looking out for you. This is a fantasy planet, and so everything they tell you is bad is probably good. But I'm just a conspiracy theorist, and so
welcome to the club, bro.
Eat your seed oils, and go to the vote for Joe Biden, and we'll take care of you, I guess.
Yeah. We got the Masons, and then we have the conspiracy theorists, secret society. So we're part of that.
Well, even Carol Quigley, who was an insider, he says very plainly, like, these people who run the world are not, they're not something stupid like the KKK or the Masons. They have no secret hand clasps or signs or robes or passwords. They don't need this stuff because they know each other very well, because these are all very old families going back thousands of years. They all know who each other is and who to trust. So why would they fool around with these grandiose productions and fancy clothes and memorizing lines and doing handshakes and things like that? None of this is going to help you dominate the planet. Now, they do recruit out of Masons, and there's no denying they do. There very obviously are people who are Masons who have been sucked into this one way or the other. And I think that probably has to do with the fact that, a Mason is, generally speaking, able or supposed to be able to keep a secret. And this is all about secrecy. Anybody who blabs usually winds up, committing suicide by shooting themselves in the head 2 or 3 times.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, I mean, I guess looking into the book and the Apocalypse of Yajna Valkyr, I guess very plainly to start off, I mean, we hear this, term Atlantis thrown around so often. Like, what is Atlantis?
Now a short break from the episode.
One of my favorite testimonials that we've ever received from Rise Above the Herd, it was from an incredible human named Sarah Larson, who's now out in the world doing great work in the field of neuroscience, developing programs and helping individuals rewire their brains and break free from stress and pursue optimal brain health. Sarah joined us in round 2, and this is what she had to say. She said, "This has been the best investment in myself I've ever made. Rise Above the Herd is a masterclass on unlocking your true potential and personifying the hero within you. It is the call to adventure you need to level up in every area of your life. It has reignited the creative spark in me and given me a renewed purpose to overcome any obstacle and achieve any dream I set my mind to. Joel and Yerasimos are compassionate, wise beyond their years, salt of the earth kind of guys that walk the path of integrity every day and truly care about the people who are trying to make positive change in their lives. They have somehow gathered, distilled, and synthesized a massive amount of data into this course, and the clarity of thought and expression by which they teach it is remarkable. This has been the best investment in myself I've ever made. If you feel the call to join, listen to your intuition and take that first step." Sarah, thank you so much for that. Guys, round 10 of Rise Above the Herd starts July 28th and it runs through to October 8th. If you'd like to be part of the next cohort and go through your own personal transformation and see what's on the other side, then please hit the link in the bio or head to riseabovetheherd.co to claim one of the spots for this round.
Back to the episode.
Atlantis is, as far as we know, the first civilization on this planet. The human organism, Homo sapiens, what you are, what I am, that species began about 300,000 years ago roughly in Morocco, which is interesting because this region of Africa is also where you find Atlantis. And so the oldest story, again, that we know of Atlantis, there might be an older one, but we'll get to that, comes from Plato, who says they lived in this area. And so there are a number of lies, outright lies, verifiable lies that have been seeded into the public sphere about Atlantis. One of these is that Plato says Atlantis was an island in the Atlantic, somewhere out front of the Strait of Gibraltar. That is not true. If you read the Timaeus, he says that that island is an island that they were using as a base for their navy. Great candidate for this is Madeira. It's still there. And he goes on to say that they controlled all of the other islands out in the ocean in this space. So now we're talking about Cape Verde, the Canary Islands, the Savage Islands, the Azores, and potentially even Ireland. Because if you look at the Irish myths, there's a book called the Lebor Gabala Eren, and I'm probably not pronouncing that right. But if you read that, the Irish have legends of a magical race of people who arrive in their lands with fantastical powers, basically gods, and they faded into history and were kind of forgotten. But all of the legends about like fairies and gnomes or leprechauns, this is what that race sort of transitioned into being in the Irish legends, and they're called the Tua de Danann. So we have lots of legends about Atlanteans, it seems. They're just not always called Atlanteans. But invariably, when the legend talks about where these people come from, they point to Northwest Africa, which incidentally is also part of the Atlantean kingdom, according to Plato, because he says they controlled all of these islands, but also parts of the mainland. So they controlled the part of Africa that bordered the ocean, the part of Africa that bordered the Mediterranean, and also southern Europe from Spain to Italy. So Atlantis is not an island in the Atlantic, guys. It never was. So this idea that Atlantis is a lone island in the middle of the Atlantic, that was completely made up by somebody at some point, because Plato does not say this. He says it's this very vast part of Africa, a huge part of Europe, and all of Macaronesia. Now, this is also exactly where we find something called the Richat structure. And the Richat structure is a series of islands, one within the other, perfectly round, exactly the way Plato describes the Atlantean capital city. And it's huge. It's absolutely huge. The outer ring is 24 kilometers in diameter. And then there's an outer ring, an inner ring, and then a central island. And we find this exact structure in Mauritania. Now, that's hundreds of kilometers inland. So how would they have accessed the ocean? This is another big lie, because just recently, in the last few years, a paper was published that outlines the evidence for a vast river system that crisscrossed North Africa. The Sahara Desert did not exist thousands of years ago. This was like the Amazon rainforest with a great big river running through it that this paper calls the Tamanrasset. However, if we look at old maps that have Africa in it, the river is there and it's huge. So, and we can find this river on maps going all the way back to Ptolemy. And I can show you these maps, actually, if I can share my screen.
Sure,
Is that something I can do?
Yeah.
Yep.
So let's see some ancient maps, starting with Ptolemy's map. So this was made roughly 150 AD. You seeing this?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
So there's not much here. You could see the Mediterranean over here. You have the Indian Ocean down here. And This area here is Africa, and you can see they don't know a whole lot about it. But if we go in to Africa, obviously here is the Nile, but here is this other massive river running through Africa that was supposedly only discovered a few years ago. So what is it doing on a map that is almost 2,000 years old? But wait, there's more. So this is from 1351. This was done by the Medicis. And you can, if I zoom in on Africa again, you can see, it's not as detailed, it's harder to see, but you can see this circular feature here in West Africa and all of these other rivers crisscrossing the continent.
Yep.
It gets even more interesting. This is from 1418. This is from a Chinese admiral named Zheng He. Now, I should mention that there is some discussion over the authenticity of this map, but let's assume it is real. This would tell us that in 1418, almost 80 years before Columbus, sailed the ocean blue in 1492, but they have all of the Americas here drawn in a roughly accurate shape. So Columbus did not discover the Americas if this map is legitimate. Even if it is a fake, let's zoom in on Africa.
River.
It seems like an odd thing to include this massive river going through West Africa or North Africa. But wait, there's even more. Let's go to the Fra Mauro map of 1450. Now this is upside down, so north is at the bottom. So let's zoom in on Africa again. This is very stylized. There's a lot of stuff on here, but you see a very different West Africa. First of all, we have this giant inland sea, which is no longer there. And it's not like they could have screwed this up because it's 1450. The Spanish and the Portuguese have been sailing all over this area for years. But we see a massive river going into a bay with a large island. And this river continues on. And it continues on and almost joins up with the Nile over here. Now, interestingly enough, on this particular map, they don't call the Nile the Nile. They call the Nile its biblical name, the Gihon. And interestingly enough, in the Bible, in the beginning of Genesis, it's naming off the major rivers of the world, and it calls the Nile the Gihon, and it says it runs through the whole land of Ethiopia, which of course it does. But before the Gihon, the Bible names another river called the Pison, which runs through a land called Havilah. Now, officially, we have no idea what this river is or where Havilah is. But if you're reading a map, as one would do, or reading anything from left to right, you would expect that the Pison and Havilah would be to the west of the Nile. And we see, especially in this map, we see a very large river running through that area. And there's more. 1482, the Cosmographica Germanus. Again, here's the river running in one bay, another bay, and it continues on into the interior of Africa. This one is the 1554 Munster map. Again, another river, giant river running through Africa. This is my favorite, the 1565 Ferrando Bertelli map. Look at this river. And this one goes clear across Africa and joins the Nile. Now, this is exactly how the Greeks envisioned Africa. They thought if you sailed south along the Nile far enough, you would arrive at another river that you could sail along clear across the entire continent and out into the Atlantic. How is it that for thousands of years, we've been putting this river on every map? And then suddenly it disappears. Here's another one, 1570. There's the river. Now, in these maps, it's called the Black River, the Fluvius Niger. These are all obviously in Latin, because all the smart people in the Renaissance spoke Latin. So again, river. And this goes on. Here it is. Here's another one all the way across Africa. And it just keeps going. Here we are, 1688, 1710, 1787. You can see it's starting to get smaller and smaller now. And this is the 1805 Carey map. And the delta, the river delta, is still there, but it's fairly small now. They don't include these huge bays along the course of the river. But so what's up with this? Like,
Yeah,
What
tell
happened?
us.
What happened to the river?
what happened to this river? How did we forget about it completely and then suddenly rediscover it? Like, we even had a name for it. You know, in the Bible called it the Pison, but on these maps they called it the the Fluvius Niger. Where did it go? And why does nobody talk about this missing river? But this is the river that allowed the Atlanteans to sail out of the reshot structure and into the Atlantic and then explore the world 20-odd thousand years ago, which is roughly the point in time when their civilization started. At least that's what it looks like according to the genetic information. Now, let me get to the third big lie about Atlantis. Now, I think we've all heard that Plato's the source of the Atlantis story, and there's nothing else. Nothing. Everything else is just derived from Plato, or some people are, channeling, which is not really considered scientific. And they've stood on this. They've stood on this statement for years and years and years. This is not true. There is another story of Atlantis, and we've had the manuscripts of it for over 1,000 years now. Now, the writer is a Roman historian who lived in Sicily called Diodorus. He was centuries after Plato, but this is not his original work. He's actually copying stories out of another work that was done by a guy named Dionysius of Alexandria. Now, we don't really know. We don't have a historical record of a guy named Dionysius of Alexandria, so some people think maybe he's talking about Dionysius of Miletus or some other Dionysius. But all of these other Dionysiuses are either contemporaries of or older than Plato. So this guy named Diodorus lists a book out of the Library of Alexandria, ostensibly by a guy named Dionysius Schidobrachian. And this book is filled with information about Atlantis. And he calls them that by name in this book. So it's the fact that we've had this book as long as we have, and everybody is saying Plato is the only source of the story. This has to be a lie. And it has to be a lie because the same guy that translated my copy of the Timaeus and Critias also translated Diodorus's book that contains the story about Atlantis. And this has just been completely ignored by the academics of the world, I suppose, or they try and explaining it away as a derivation of Plato's tale, but it's clearly not. And about 100 years ago, this book was written by a guy named Lewis Spence, The History of Atlantis. And in this book, he points out that Diodorus furnishes us with almost as much information about Atlantis as Plato did. And it covers entirely different subjects than Plato does. Plato zeroes in on the location of Atlantis, the shape of their city, the structure of their government, the rights of succession, that kind of stuff. Diodorus's story is all about the royal family and the family who founded it, and the names and the genealogies of the people who ran it or founded Atlantis. And this is where things start getting interesting, because Diodorus also says that Atlantis is the source of all of our tales about the gods, meaning the gods of the Mediterranean. And this would make sense, because even today, when a primitive society meets an advanced one, it seems like more often than not, they start worshiping the advanced society as gods. And we have an example of this right now. There's an island in the South Pacific with a tribe living there that dress up like American GIs and march around on a parade deck and have built makeshift planes out of wood. And they worship an American GI named John Frum. How the hell did this happen? Well, in World War II, this particular island was used by the United States to bomb Japan. They had built an air base there, and the planes, rather than fly all the way back to Hawaii to rearm and refuel, would just fly to this island for whatever they needed, and then go back to Japan and continue bombing the crap out of Japan. And so this uncontacted tribe, the United States military had no idea they were there. They were just, off in the woods hiding from these, terrifying beings who have machines that fly in the sky and build these impossible structures and have weapons of thunder and fire. So very quickly they assumed that these people were gods, and then started emulating them. Now, if this happened in the last 100 years, could it have happened in the last 10,000 years or 20,000 years or 100,000 years? You bet it could. And so a lot of the ancient religions were inspired by people's contacts with Atlanteans, including the Old Testament, unfortunately. Sorry, Christians, sorry, Jews. Because if you read Genesis, it points to this river that crosses the land of Havilah. And this river joined up with Eden. Eden is Atlantis, folks. This is the same place. And there's more to that. If we read the book of Enoch, Enoch is famously the biblical patriarch who was taken by God while he was still alive, and then was seen no more. So it said Enoch at age 65 was taken by God, where he walked with God the rest of his days, which was another 300 years. But it also says Enoch had more sons and daughters. So if we consider the Rishat structure to be the capital city of Atlantis and this region of the world to be their empire, Enoch says that after he was taken, his son Noah is born, and people freak out because Noah is this gleaming white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, angelic-looking thing, and everybody freaks out because They're like, how, he looks like one of the angels. How did this happen? And then it says that and Methuselah goes to his father Enoch, who is at the western edge of the world.
Mm.
Now, also in the book of Jubilees, it says that they conducted Enoch into Eden. And later on in the same book, it says that God destroyed Eden with a flood, just like Atlantis. Now, in the book of Enoch, it also says, it gives us a time frame, because Enoch is taken to Atlantis and he's shown something that is coming, that is going to destroy the world. And it seems, if you read closely enough, that they took him to an observatory and had him look through a telescope. And what did they show him? Well, they showed him a cluster of comets heading towards Earth, coming to destroy everything. And this actually happened. It collided with the planet about 12,800 years ago in something called the Younger Dryas impact event. And anybody familiar with the work of Graham Hancock is going to be very well aware of this. Graham has done fantastic work bringing this event in our history to the public light. And it seems pretty much, in the bag at this point that this comet collided with the planet about 12,800 years ago and kicked off a 1,200-year-long nuclear winter called the Younger Dryas. Now, in the book of Enoch, God tells him that thing that we showed you is coming to hit Earth and it will destroy everything. It will cause a global flood. It will do all these nasty things. And it's going to do it in 70 generations. So that's about 1,400 years. It's a long time. But if we add 1,400 years to 12,800 years, we get 14,200 years ago. Incidentally, 14,200 years ago is precisely where we see DNA from the Levant, from where Enoch is from, appear in West Africa. Not only that, around that same time in human history, we see DNA from West Africa appear in the Fertile Crescent and the Levant. There's our Watchers and our Nephilim. This happened, folks. Angels, demons, gods, these are all Atlanteans. And they fought a war, a civil war, the war in heaven, angels versus angels, and gods versus gods, Olympians and Titans. This is how we remembered a civil war that these people fought. Now, we need to go back to Diodorus because we need to understand this family that was running this empire. So Plato says it was started by Poseidon, and then Poseidon had 5 sets of twins. The firstborn was Atlas, and he got the part of the kingdom just south of the big mountain, which is the Tubkal Mountain in West Africa. Back then they called it Mount Atlas, of course, because Atlas is the king, and of course you name everything after the king. So he gets the capital city. He is the king of kings. All the other kings of the various regions all sort of answer to him. And then his twin brother, gets the northern regions of Africa and the southern parts of Europe. And interestingly enough, this is in that period where the Atlanteans are there, 14,000, 15,000 years ago or earlier. We find all kinds of skeletons that have had their front teeth ripped out. Seems like an odd thing to do. Now, this is not an all at once kind of rite of passage thing either. And this would be a pretty macabre rite of passage to just cripple someone for life. How you can't eat properly anymore. Now, why would you want to do something like that to somebody? Maybe they're eating something they're not supposed to be eating. And if we look at the legends, most of these gods are livid, absolutely infuriated with anybody who engages in cannibalism. Gee, that sounds like a great punishment for a cannibal. One, it's going to make it harder for them to be cannibals. And two, as soon as they open their mouth, you're like, oh, there's the cannibal. Found one. And so this whole idea of chopping off or ripping out the implements of your crimes, you know, we've been, other society has chopped hands off of thieves, or, you know, penises off of rapists, or, you know, whatever your preferred implement of crime is, they cut it off. And maybe this is where it began, by ripping the teeth out of people engaging in cannibalism.
That's wild.
So this seems to have been a factor, at least in this civil war fought by the Atlanteans. Now, in the words of Diodorus, the brother of Atlas, who rules over this part of the Atlantean kingdom, is not called Gadirus. You're going to recognize this one. He's called Cronus, the child eater. So maybe they were sacrificing children to him because Atlanteans practiced a form of ancestor worship, where if an important person died, they would raise them to heaven and name a star after them. And conversely, if a heavenly entity was being punished, they would be sent down to Earth to endure life here. We see these stories told in Diodorus, who tells us about the raising of their founder, whose name is Uranus. So Uranus was raised into the sky to become the celestial sphere. And so this is where the Greek god Uranos comes from. And also the Mesopotamian god Anu. Anu is the god of the heavens. So that's where that all comes from. Now, Uranus has a bunch of sons by a wife named Titaea. And Titaea, obviously this is where the Titans come from. All of her sons were called Titans. Titaea was transformed into Gaia when she died. And this goes on and on. You know, Atlas had 7 daughters who were called Atlantides when they were alive, but then after they had died, they were called the Pleiades. So the whole notion of astrology or astronomy and something called celestial navigation, navigating by the stars, these are all skills discovered or invented by the Atlanteans, because they were very attuned to the sky. It was part of their whole religion was the universe. So Cronus is in both Plato, Plato alludes to a war between forces outside the Strait of Gibraltar and forces within the Strait of Gibraltar. Now that sounds like the forces within the Strait of Gibraltar being Cronus's army, because those are the portions of the kingdom that he ruled, and the portions outside were the rest of Atlantis, who had to unite against him because he was breaking the law, and they had to depose him, and he was replaced by Zeus, who is his son. And that's what Diodorus says as well. Diodorus's Cronus has a son named Zeus, who eventually leads an army against Cronus, who is described as a very pernicious, greedy character, who is eventually deposed by Zeus in war. And so we defeat Cronus, we send him to Tartarus, which incidentally, Tartarus is the island of Tenerife in the Canary Islands. This is another thing that Enoch tells us very plainly, because after he goes and meets God in Atlantis, he says they take him out to a place where things are chaos, which is the open ocean, and he sees 7 islands rising up, or 7 mountains rising up out of the chaos. There's only one chain of 7 islands off the coast of West Africa, and that's the Canaries. And then he talks about seeing, one of these mountains bigger than the rest. Well, that's Tenerife. And then he sees rivers and columns of fire and deep, dark, smooth places, which are lava tubes. And the angel he's with tells him this is where these rebellious angels, the fallen watchers, this is where they're going to spend the rest of their lives and die here. So yeah, that's Tenerife. So I forgot where I was going before I switched over to Enoch.
I mean, you were talking about the war against Kronos and...
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So Kronos is imprisoned in Tartarus. But what do you do with his entire army?
Make them into slaves? I don't know.
Well, the Atlanteans don't seem to be into slavery. They're not into cannibalism. It seems as though they were exiled, because this is that mass of genes from West Africa that we see arrive in the Middle East right around the time Enoch says that they showed up, because again, the genetic record supports that this migration of people from West Africa into the Fertile Crescent right around this exact point in time of our history. Exactly when Enoch says it happened is exactly when the genetic record says these people made their move. So they go in, they land, by the hundreds, and now we get the stories of our Anunnaki. And so they brought with them their form of ancestor worship. And so we have, the god Anu, who is Uranus. But then we also have Enlil, who is the ruler of the world. And so if you're an exiled soldier of Kronos, that's a good candidate. And Enlil is typically, in Mesopotamian legends, he's kind of a prick. He's not particularly fond of other humans, especially the ones that they created in the Fertile Crescent. They just enslaved them, and the whole idea that we created you is just something you feed slaves so that they don't revolt. Because early on in the history of these so-called gods in the Middle East, they didn't originally have human beasts of burden. And, I use this term human, like they're as human as we are. They're all humans. They're all humans. There's nothing special about these people. In the anthropological records, they're called Ibero-Marusians because we find skeletons of these people in Iberia, Spain, and Mauritania, which is Northwest Africa. So these people wound up in the Fertile Crescent. They enslaved the local population, which they had a name too. They're called Natufians. Very interesting culture. They're the first people in the region to start practicing agriculture. Technically, Atlanteans did it first, but there's no way we would know, because their entire kingdom has been turned into a desert and buried under a mile of sand. So there's really no way for us to know this at this point, aside from, snippets of evidence that we find elsewhere, things that they've left behind in their travels, and all of the legends that have sprouted up in their wake. So, so we have these Anunnaki. The Ajiji are the laboring class of gods, and initially they do everything, but they eventually revolt. And a deal is struck that a beast of burden will be created to bear the load of the gods and grow their wheat and make their bread and brew their beer. And so this is the story that they pumped into the local Natufians to keep them obedient, because they didn't want slave revolts. And another interesting thing is that these Mesopotamian gods, well, Enlil in particular, he was a hardcore eugenicist and population controller. He massacred the humans 3 times, again and again and again, to control their numbers, because he didn't want them to revolt. And he also complained that they were too noisy and he couldn't stand all the racket they were making. So let's just kill a whole bunch of them, because, of course, that's what you do when your neighbors are annoying you. Lovely guy Kronos, eh?
Hmm.
But, in this pantheon of Mesopotamian gods, Enlil had a brother named Enki. Now, Enki is because we're dealing with Kronos' followers, Enki is subsumed. But he is nevertheless a friend to humanity. Enki is the one who, against Enlil's wishes, warned the Sumerian flood hero about the impending flood. And then he builds a boat, rides the water to safety, and we all know the story. It's been retold a lot of times. So Enki is also associated with water, and this is a really good candidate for the Mesopotamian version of King Atlas. So there are incredible amounts of parallels between ancient Mesopotamia, Greek, Canaanite religions. Canaanites were the ones living in the Levant. And genetically, Canaanites share a lot of similarities or are descendants of those people who came from West Africa. We know this. It's undeniably true because that's it. That's what's in the genetic record. So these people who were defeated and exiled from Atlantis, they're still here. And it's a lot of people. In fact, most of the men living in North Africa today are descendants of Kronos. Interestingly enough. Now, also, a lot of people living across North Africa are also descendants of Adam. Because not only do we know Uranus or Poseidon's sort of Y chromosome haplogroup, a little mutation that just gets passed down from father to son ad infinitum. We know that one. We know Kronos's one, but we also know Adam's one because that is the only Y haplogroup from the Fertile Crescent that we find in these ancient caves across North Africa. It's E-M78. And so remember I said, we found people from the Levant buried in West Africa at the time that Enoch was taken there. Well, so these people were tested and they were found to be about 2/3 Natufian and 1/3 Ibero-Marusian. So these are the grandchildren or great-grandchildren of Enoch who had been taken to this region of Earth, where humanity began.
So according to you, Adam, correct me if I'm wrong or I'm missing this, is Enoch or
no. Hey, Enoch is the seventh after Adam.
Gotcha. Okay. And where did Adam? Okay.
Yeah. Who is Adam in this story?
Adam was an experiment. So the Atlanteans or Ibero-Marusians or whatever you want to call them, they visited the Levant frequently to among other places, but we find evidence of Ibero-Marusians in the Levant going back, I think, up to 19,000 years. So they'd been going to that region of the planet for a long time. So they were already being worshipped as gods for a long time before Adam ever came along. But I think at some point, the king of Atlantis decided to take one of these people who at the time were called Kabarans, and these were pure hunter-gatherers, practiced no agriculture, very primitive society. But they took one back to the royal garden in Atlantis where God took frequent walks. And Adam was placed there and taught, the basics of agriculture and a whole lot of other stuff. And then he eats from the tree of wisdom. Well, what the heck tree is that? And Enoch gives us the answer, because on Enoch's voyage, first he's taken to the Atlantis, then he's taken to the Canary Islands, but afterwards, then he's taken south to the middle of the earth, the equator, which is exactly where you would find Cape Verde. And they show him some other things. And then it says that he is taken east again, over rivers, over mountains, over oceans, over the Erythraean Sea, and to a place called the Garden of Righteousness. So if you read this trajectory very carefully in the Book of Enoch, he flies over the Arabian Peninsula, over the Persian Gulf, and they set him down somewhere in India, because he mentions that he sees a lot of plants there: cinnamon, cardamom, pepper, sugarcane. These are all native Indian plants. They would not have been anywhere else 14,000 years ago. So then he goes to the Garden of Righteousness in India, and he sees the Tree of Wisdom there. And the angel with him says, "This is the tree that, thy father and thy mother, old in age," and blah, blah, blah. They ate from and knew great wisdom, and then were cast out of the garden. And then Enoch says, okay, well, it's as tall as a Mediterranean fir, leaves like that of the carob tree, and fruit like that of the vine. So is there a native Indian tree that grows about 100 feet tall, has spade-shaped leaves, and grows little bunches of fruit? There just so happens to be one exact match from India called the Jamun tree. And the Jamun tree is a very sacred tree in all of the Eastern religions. The Hindus and the Buddhists and the Jains worship this tree for its healing properties, because it's known, clinically, proven clinically, that the Jamun fruit tree lowers your blood sugar. Now, to Atlanteans who are starting to practice agriculture and maybe eating, more grains and more nuts, and brewing beer and baking bread, because that's what the exiles started getting the Natufians to do for them. So it seems that they were consuming this stuff, and there is evidence, archaeological evidence, that some form of domestication was taking place in Africa around this time. And so if you're eating this stuff, you're going to start having these kinds of diseases of civilization. You're going to start seeing things like obesity or bad teeth and high blood sugar, eventually leading to type 2 diabetes. And this is exactly what the Indians used Jamun fruit to control. And so it would stand to reason that the Atlanteans were using it for the same reason. Now, if Adam and Eve, these two social experiments that you've brought into your garden, start eating up all of your medicine, you're going to get rid of them, unfortunately. No hard feelings. I know it's a tasty fruit and all, but I need it.
Chris, beyond the history of Atlantis, what is the impact that it has today for modern man and modern civilization? What does it tell us about the evil that exists on this planet, and also about how to free ourselves from this tyranny? How does it help us in that regard?
Well, great. That's a great question, and that's where this book takes you. But so these exiles that were that basically took over the Middle East and ruled over them like gods. These people, even in the Bible, these were the kings and heroes of old, men of renown. And, so this is just propaganda by the Nephilim, who are the half Atlantean, half Natufian children of the exiles. And the Bible kind of, it does a bit of PR for them, but the Book of Enoch is entirely different. The Book of Enoch says these people were awful. They steal everyone's property. They murder people. They lie constantly. They drink blood and eat human flesh. So again, we're back to cannibalism, drinking blood, these avaricious people who just want to rule over everybody and take all of their property. Well, that sounds like the ruling class of forever. And these people have not gone extinct. As I mentioned, there are millions upon millions upon millions of people today who have descended from them. Now, that doesn't mean that, they all get the Nephilim ruling class bonus treatment throughout life. I think, in fact, most of them are probably completely unaware of this. But the ones that that is the true ruling power of this planet. And the Atlanteans, who are no longer on this planet because they left Earth after a second cataclysm that happened 1,200 years after the first one, the Younger Dryas impact event, which kicked off what the Greeks call the Iron Age. So after the second event, which was called Phaethon, which triggered the flood of Deucalion, that then gave rise to the Iron Age. And it says the gods leave Earth because humanity has become too corrupted. They've forsaken all of the ancient customs of Xenia, and thievery, immorality is running rampant. They leave. And there's all kinds of legends that tell us where they went. They went to the Pleiades, which is a neighboring star cluster. It's in terms of our stellar neighborhood, it's not too far away. It's made up of hundreds, potentially thousands of stars, young stars, where you might have a good chance of finding habitable planets that have not evolved intelligent life yet. So that seems to be where they went, because a lot of Native American legends say our gods, they come from the Pleiades.
Mm-hmm.
I take it you're not a proponent of flat Earth theory.
No, that was part and parcel of the I guess the parcel of goods of that they were feeding the slaves. Because if you look at the biblical cosmology, where you have the dome and then the flat Earth and the waters below, this is an exact replica of the ancient Sumerian view of the world, where again, great big dome, flat Earth, waters below, which they called the Apsu, and then the underworld, which the Hebrews called Sheol, but they called Kur, I think, Kur or Urkala, depending on are they Sumerian or Akkadian or Babylonian. But so that model of the cosmos is what these exiles taught their Natufian slaves. And that, of course, that idea that this is all there is helped to reinforce the view of themselves and their lot in life, that we are the gods, you are our creations, so is this world that you're living on, and you serve us. And that's that. So don't look for anything else. There's nothing beyond, this is not an infinite universe of unimaginable opportunities. So it was, I'm pretty sure it was just a way for them to demoralize them, and just another way of preventing them from revolting. Because if they thought the universe is infinite and our gods are out there, they're not in here, they might have done things a little differently.
Gotcha.
So they leave, but they've left us with a number of messages preserved in various legends, that they're telling us that there is going to come a point in time where they're going to return. And when they do, our way of life on this planet will be over. Because, of course, as Enoch calls it, God will return to destroy all of the works of evil. And so, what are the works of evil? These are our governments, these are our religions, this is all of our technology as well. We are going to experience this very soon, probably within 5 to 10 years, a series of calamities which will end life as we know it on this planet. But life as we know it has to end in order for the next way of life to come. And that is going to be coexistence with the world's first civilization, who has mastered things like, anti-gravity or time manipulation, antimatter, remote viewing, astral projection, all of these, things that kind of fall under the banner of the supernatural or suppressed technologies. These are all real things, and they've been telling us more or less the theory behind how this all works, because you find in another ancient esoteric work called the Asclepius, which is done by a guy named Hermes Trismegistus, who is actually Enoch. They're the same man. This is the same man who was taken and trained by the gods. The Asclepius is filled with the Atlantean cosmology, and it really puts our understanding of the universe to shame, because they were very focused on time. There's chapters and chapters and chapters in the Asclepius on time and how time works and what is the mechanism of how this works. And he talks a lot about a wheel, almost called eternity, which is what sets the flow of time in motion. But we experience forward-moving time only because there is reverse time happening somewhere else. And this is going to get complicated, but this cosmology is all the second part of the book, called the Divine Quaternity. So
just to confirm, it's your belief that in the next 5 to 10 years, Atlanteans going to return to Earth, and there's going to be a bunch of cataclysm events.
Yes. So because it appears as though we're being primed for some sort of big alien reveal in 2027. Now, this is probably going to be some form of Project Bluebeam. They may be actual aliens, but these are beings who have come to be aligned or allied with the ruling powers of this planet. Because when the Atlanteans went out, it seems as though they encountered genuine extraterrestrials who took a great interest in how this uppity species from planet Earth was able to advance so quickly and become so powerful. Because in ET lore, the Pleiadians are unfathomably powerful. The Pleiadians are, when humans encounter them, humans from Earth, they're very kindly, almost angelic like beings. However, wherever they're seen with other aliens, like for example the Greys appear to be some sort of servant class to them. So it doesn't seem to be all peace and wonderful things out in the universe. There are issues, but those issues center around Earth and the Nephilim ruling it, because they see the Nephilim ruling the Earth seem to be serving up humanity as something to be experimented on by other races who are trying to understand the Atlanteans and how it is that they came to be what they are.
Let me just finish
this one thing. So 2027 is probably going to be the year of the fake alien invasion, which may actually include real aliens. So, be on the lookout for that. But there was a Pleiadian who visited back in the 1970s, a guy in Switzerland named Billy Meyer. And she told him that the new golden age will arrive in 2028. Now, if you've been following the history so far, well, I haven't mentioned sort of the ages, the golden age, the silver, the bronze, the iron. The transitions between all of these ages occurred with some sort of cataclysm. From gold to silver was the war in heaven. From silver to bronze was the Younger Dryas impact event. And then from bronze to iron was Phaethon, this great, big, huge meteor that came out of the sun, swept across Africa, and incinerated the whole continent. It actually entered the atmosphere somewhere over China, around Mongolia, because the legends of this event go all the way over there. Incidentally, from Mongolia across Persia, Arabia, and Africa is just one continuous desert. And the Greeks are very matter of fact in saying that Phaethon was a real event. This is something in the Timaeus and Critias. Plato says it was a real event. A celestial body came down to earth and did this. So they knew about it. They just didn't know exactly when it happened, but they do know that that kicked off. After that happened, the gods left Earth. Well, their entire kingdom had just been incinerated. So yeah, sure. Why wouldn't they? If they've established colonies on other planets now, of course they're going to go. And so there's always these cataclysms. Terrible things happen, be it war or some sort of celestial event. And so in 2028, I think is probably when the final battle for the soul of humanity occurs between the Atlanteans, who are returning to expel or exterminate the Nephilim and their partners in crime here on this planet, because that is what we see in the book of Revelation, and countless other societies have these myths of the gods returning to vindicate righteousness on this planet. This is the mother planet of humanity. You know, we didn't start on somewhere else and then come here. Panspermia may be a thing, but we're talking about millions and millions and millions of years ago, long before there were ever any sort of primate. So the Atlanteans have this plan to come back because they've been exploring other worlds for as long as they have, 10,000 years or more, because the event that kicked off the Iron Age happened about 11,600 years ago. Incidentally, this is also around the same period of time when a place named Göbekli Tepe was built, which seems to preserve a record of these disasters. That was probably built by Nephilim, but I can get into details about why that seems to be the case. But they do need to return because they've established colonies on other planets with other conditions, different light, different atmosphere, different gravity. And so the evolution of these people have diverged and could have diverged quite significantly up until this point. If you look at dogs, for example, every dog breed you see all was made or bred from a common ancestor about 10,000 years ago. So if you can turn an ancient wolf into Chihuahuas and Great Danes in 10,000 years, just imagine what could happen to the human organism and what some of them may look like. And this is probably, where we get these things like tall whites or, which are, 8-9 foot tall, very slender, human looking creatures. So they're evolving in different directions, and eventually they will speciate and they will no longer be human. And it seems as though that there's some sort of consequence to this, where it seems as though the souls of beings can only incarnate into the same or similar species. And this seems to be a project of theirs. They're very interested in spirituality. Their sole concern, pun intended, is their souls. So they want to maintain this bridge between our planet and their planets, so that good souls from our world can reincarnate as them on other planets, or vice versa, if one of them needs to come back to Earth to do something. If they speciate, it sounds to me from the conversations that this Pleiadian had with this Swiss farmer, it sounds as though if that happens, that will no longer that they won't be able to do that anymore. And that this ability to reincarnate in other humans on other worlds, this ability that we have may be one of these unique things that aliens are interested in. Maybe they can't do that. But
Hey, Chris, I want to ask you this question. Let's say 2027, 2028 happens and none of the stuff that you're saying right now occurs. How does that impact you? How would that impact you? Because there's a lot of speculation with a lot of this stuff. Historically, there's many different theories about what Atlantis was, who these beings were, et cetera, et cetera. But like to make a claim like
if they don't show up.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just repeating the timelines that has already been written down or communicated. Yeah. So, I mean, that was 50 years ago. Maybe they've changed their plans. Sure. Maybe they've accelerated their plans. Maybe they've rolled them back some more. They want to kind of wait and see, is humanity going to figure this out and finally deal with these Nephilim folk and get rid of them and free the world? Because they are ANCAPs. The Pleiadians do not have governments. They do not have these kinds of institutions. And they look at the ones on Earth and they're like, these are criminal organizations. These are run by people who are intractably evil. And we don't want anything to do with them. So they're very plain about that. Yeah.
What's next for us? Like, what can we do? Let's say this does happen, in 5 to 10 years. Like, what are the lessons for humanity? For anyone listening to this, it's great. We have history, we contemplated what came before, but here we are now. There may be an event happening in the future, that you're saying and other people are saying, like, what can we do?
Well, they want us to join them on this path of spiritual evolution that they've been on for thousands and thousands of years. And it seems like they've gotten quite far along with this because, of course, they have the abilities like telepathy or telekinesis or appearing and disappearing at will. So how much of this is technology and how much of this is spiritual evolution? And is it some sort of intermingling of these two things? Is their technology controlled by your mind? Mm-hmm. If as advanced as we are, it could be the case that, we still, even if they handed us a piece of their technology, we wouldn't be able to use it because we're just not mentally or spiritually sophisticated enough to do it. It would be like handing a grand piano to an African bushman and expecting him to be able to play it. He'll mash some keys, maybe come up with a little jingle, but it's going to be a long time before you see a Mozart come out of that tribe.
Yeah. Chris, man, thank you so much for sharing. It seems as though, we've gone for 90 odd minutes and only scratched the surface. There's obviously a lot more to this for sure. I guess in closing, how can people who are interested in this knowledge and in this story, continue their research, get in touch? Where do you want to direct them?
Well, of course, they can read the book. It's available on through Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the online bookstores. You'll find The Apocalypse of Yajnavalkya there. It's in EPUB, Kindle, and paperback right now. So take your pick. And if you want to join a conversation, if you go to libraryofkern.com, CERNE, and you go down to the bottom, there's a link to a Telegram group, and you can join us there.
Cool, man. We'll have all those links below. Any final words you have for our audience?
Keep your eyes on the stars.
Nice. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone else, thank you for listening. Take care.
Thank you.
Smoke and mirrors, I'm seeing through the illusion. Waking up in a time they think you're in a delusion. Somebody set the alarms, cause they be too busy snoozing. I'm in a DeLorean, fast forward in evolution.